Welcome to lesson number 4, rules for rounding. So we're going to review our rounding rules. So by the end of the day today, I want you to be able to successfully round numbers to the indicated place value. All right. So how do I look at it? I look at rounding like the rounding hill. So whatever our number is, okay, I'm looking at it as here are my possible numbers. Looks like that. Not a perfect hill, but if this is my hill and I'm heading up it, in order to get over the hill, I have to have a 5 or better. So it's kind of like if you have a Polaris snowmobile, you're probably only going to make it to a 4, and you'd end up coming back down the hill. However, if you have an Arctic Cat, you can get over that hill with the rounding. So I look at it in terms of a rounding hill. So for example, we use the rounding hill off the side here. So let's say I had, let's go with 34, and I want to round to the nearest 10. So what you need to do is you need to look at the next number to decide which way to round. So what would happen? My choices would be it would stay a 3, or the 3 will become a 4. It's the next number that decides. So when I went to round that, I would go up to the 4, and I did not get over the hill, so I got to come back down. So my result then is going to be a 3. So if I was to round that to the nearest 10, it would be 30. All right. So we're going to have that rounding hill as we go through here. So couple of examples. So I want to round to the indicated decimal place. So some of the homework just has it underlined. So they'll give you a number that looks like this. Say 1,238 decimal 27. And then they will indicate where they want you to round. So let's round to the nearest 100. So nearest 100. So when I go to round this number, I'm going to have equals. The 1's not going to change, but I'm looking at that 2. Is that 2 going to stay a 2, or is it going to become a 3? So I have my hill. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9. So how far up the hill do I go? You look at the number beside. Looks like I have a Polaris because I can only make it up to the 3, which means I'm going to fall back down the hill to the 2. So it becomes, or remains a 2, and every number after that becomes a 0. All right, so you're using that rounding hill to help you figure out which way to go with the rounding. All right, so let's try another one. Let's go with 1,258,392. And I've indicated that I want you to round to the nearest 10,000. Okay? So what does that mean? It means every number ahead of the 5 stays the same. So 1,200,000. And now my decision is, does it stay a 5 or does it become a 6? Rounding hill, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. How far up the hill did I go? Well, I have an 8, so I went up the hill and over the hill to the 8, so I would keep rolling all the way down to the 6. So that 5 is actually going to become a 6, and all of the numbers after become zeros. All right. Third one. And the next example we're looking at, let's go with another big number, then we'll do a couple decimals. So let's do 3,789,542. And I want to round, I'll make this a hard one, I want to round this number. All right, so I'm rounding the thousands column. So all the numbers before that, and I'm going to wait for a second. Let's look at this. The 9. What's the 9 going to become? The options are it stays a 9 or it becomes a 10. And I'm going to talk about that because you're going to say, no, you can't do that. And you're absolutely correct. But we'll leave it for a second. We'll deal with it, see what's happening first of all. So again, the rounding hill, and you can do this in your head once you've practiced a bit with it. You don't have to actually draw it out, but if it helps, okay, please draw it out. So rounding hill, what am I going to do? There's a 5, so I got to the top. So remember, if you can get to the top of the hill, you got over the hill. So it goes over. So it is actually going to go to a 10. Now, you can't make that 9 into a 10. Does anyone remember what you do? Again, trick question. I can't see you. Come on, guys. It's a video. Seriously. That 9 is going to go to a 10. But what happens is that extra 1 gets added to the next column. So it's actually 3, 7. The 8 will become a 9. And then everything becomes a 0. So that 9, it does become a 10. So it does become a 10, but the extra 10th is actually in this column, and the extra value of 1 goes into that column. We add 10, and there we go. All right. Fourth one. What happens if we do a decimal one? So let's do 3.7254993. And I want you to round to the nearest thousandth. So again, I'm going to have my rounding hill. So the identified number, it's either going to stay the same or it's going to get 1 bigger. So I do my rounding hill quick here. And you can just draw the rounding hill out once if you want to help it out. So I look next door. How far did I get up the hill? I only got up to the 4, which means I fall back down. So it's going to stay a 5. So everything before that would stay the same. I've decided the 5 will stay a 5, and then there'll be 3 zeros tacked on. All right. And actually, I'm incorrect. Don't even, when you're on doing decimals, you stop at the number you rounded. Okay. So we're going to practice those. You're going to have to deal with those individually, and we'll talk about that one-on-one. And then you're going to run into homework that looks like this with the columns. So I just want to show you an example of what the charts would look like. And I think I got time. I do. Lots of time here. So let's do a couple examples here. So let's do 468. Let's do 1,257,192. Let's do 4.3729, and then let's do 0.93825. Okay? So you got to read the individual column here. So the first column, it wants you to round to the nearest 10, the nearest 10. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put kind of my rounding hill up here so I can take a look at what's going on. So a tens, the nearest tens column. So you can see yesterday it's very important that you can identify the tens column. So the tens column is right here. So that means it's either going to become a 6 or stay a 6 or become a 7. So I look at the next number. It's an 8, which gets me way over the hill. So it is going to round up. So it'll be 470. What about the hundreds column? What about the hundreds? So the 4 is in the hundreds column. So it's either going to stay a 4 or become a 5. So I got to look at the next door neighbor. It's a 6. Did I get over the rounding hill? I did. So I'm going to get bigger. So that means that this answer will be 500. Now, to the nearest tenths. You'll notice the tenths, there's the THS, all right, or THS. So we're now on the other side of the decimal. There's no decimals here, all right. So at this point, I know for people who are watching this, if there's no decimals, I don't want you to worry about rounding it. So I'm just going to say NA and NA, all right. It's not meant to be a trick question. If there's no decimals, there's no rounding involved for this particular stage in the course. Okay, next, let's go to the next number then. So 10th, we're back to, sorry, the tens. So the tens is the second number, ones, tens, hundreds. So we're looking at the 9. So it's either going to stay a 9 or it's going to move up to a 10. Looking at the next number, we have a 2. 2 is way down on the hill, didn't even get close, definitely a Polaris effort. So that means that everything before the 9 is going to stay the same, and the 9 is going to stay the same, but that last digit now becomes a 0. Hundreds column. Hundreds is the third column, remember? So it's a 1. So it's either going to become a 1 or a 2. And you can write this down. So I'm going to put 1 or 2 over here in the column. Look beside it. It's a 9, way over the hill. Okay, so it's definitely going to go to the next biggest. So it's definitely going to become a 2. So the 1, 2, 5, 7 is going to stay the same, and then it becomes a 2, and everything after that is 0, 0. Again, there's no decimals, so I don't want to make this complicated. If there's no decimals, you don't have to round the decimals. All right, now on to 4.3729. We're starting with the tens column again. So the tens column is the second one here. Okay, there is nothing in the tens column at this point, so it's either going to be a 0, which it is right now, or a 1. Sorry. Yes, that's correct. Okay, because there is no number in front of the 4, but we can assume it's a 0. So is it going to stay a 4? Or sorry, is it going to stay a 0 out front? Well, we got to look at the next number beside it. The next number is a 4. So if I look, the 4 doesn't get us very far up the hill, so that means it's going to stay as is. So this number actually remains as is. To the nearest tens column. Actually, that's a mistake altogether. This one's actually a harder question than I thought. It becomes a 0, so that to the nearest tens, this is going to round to 0. Okay, because remember we said that number stays the same and everything after becomes a 0. So it actually is a 0. To the nearest hundreds. Well, hundreds is a number in front again, so it's going to be 0, 0, 4. So again, the options here are a 0 or a 1. And what's the number in front of the hundreds column? This is actually, it's trickier. I've made it trickier than I really wanted to. So it's a 0, which means you didn't even get on the rounding hill. So this is going to be 0. You look at it this way too. 4.3729. Is it closer to 0 on the number line, or is it closer to 100? And that's why it does go to 0. So if we have some trouble with this, I'll go through the explanation in a second when we do the one-on-one. Okay, nearest tenths. This is where it makes a little bit more sense. Here's our tenths column. It's a 3, so the options are either a 3 or a 4. Let's spread that out a little bit. 3 or a 4. Look at the number beside it. We have a 7. So looking at the rounding hill, 7 is over the hill. So that means we're going to go to the next number, or the biggest number, which is our 4. So it will become 4.4. And finally, thousands. I'm not even reading it right here. Thousands. So 10, 100, thousands. So it's the 2. So it's either going to be a 2 or it's going to become a 3. So when you look at the next number after that 2, we see it's a 9, which means we're way over the hill. So that means it will round to the bigger number. So it becomes a 3. So 4.373 is our answer. All right. I'm going to leave the last example for you to try on your own. We'll finish it when we get together. And if you have anything you need clarified, make sure you ask, and I will do my best to explain.